he was banned, but you can't point to him actually saying, I want you guys to go out there and destroy and loot and create havoc. He didn't give the specific order for violence. So,
Didn't he though?
I mean, look,
I think it was pretty clear on January 6th and the messages and language leading up to that that he did incite violence, that
when
he did incite the type of action that, yeah, again, he did not go into details like, oh, you should storm the Capitol and go in there and kidnap and
right.
harm those who don't agree with us.
Hmm.
But I think it was pretty evident that he basically, this is what you need to do. Go figure out how to do it.
All right, you are listening to The Brown Perspective. This is RO, and I'm here with Eduardo. What's going on today?
Not much, just enjoying my MLK weekend, relaxing, and we're getting ready to talk about some good topics today.
Yeah, so we didn't get a chance to record earlier, but still the main story out there is Trump being banned from social media. So I wanted to get your take on what that means and personally how you feel about that, because there's no, depending on who you ask, depending on where they are in the political spectrum, you're going to get different reasoning, different justification for why they think what happened is right or why they think it's wrong, and it sets us into the wrong. It either is going to bring about positive things or it's going to bring about negative long-term consequences. So I just want to get your take on that.
Yes, and before we get into the conversation, let's remind the listeners that you can now follow us on Parler. So the Brown Perspective on Parler. Just kidding. Um,
I see
but
what you
yeah,
did there.
huh?
I see what you did there.
I know. Well, we got to follow the audience,
Right.
the people. No, so I think it's interesting. And in some ways, it feels like it's too little, too late. And I know that part of the reason why companies like Twitter and Facebook are now under fire, particularly by the Department of Justice, by the administration, by members of Congress, is because there's this sense that they have this monopoly power over our communications, over our media, and I think you realize, and it's ironic, right? Because in some ways you realize the dangers of social media by the rise, and I guess you can call it a fall of Trump. But I think as it relates to the claims of freedom of expression, right? I think that that's where the conversation gets interesting because these are private companies, these are private platforms, so they
Right.
have the opportunity, they have the right to to censor or determine who they want to have on their platform and who they don't. It's not like the government, right? So our freedom of speech is guaranteed as it relates to conversations, actions with our government, not necessarily something that a private company would have to adhere to. So I think it's interesting because in some ways, and I know you've made this point, it's important for us to listen to the opposition to try to at least try to understand where they're coming from. At the same time, if they're just saying lies and instigating violence, then that's not the type of speech that should be protected, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, lies technically are protected though. That's the challenge with freedom of speech, that you can't you when once you offer the protections, that means that by default you're offering protection for unsavory language as well. But let me ask you just a question though regarding the way that you see these private companies. Do you think they're really are private, that they function independent of government? Because you see some stark contradictions with the whole privacy argument
Hmm.
when you then look at the government ordering all businesses to shut down. And you can make the claim that there's a pandemic, so the government is justified in having private businesses shut down. But that tells you also that it's not as clear cut. These companies are private, but the government steps in and regulates them. For example, remember a few years ago when that bakery didn't want to sell a cake to a gay couple?
Yeah.
Now, right? So in that case, should the government force them? to respect the rights of the gay couple. And so I know that in this particular matter, we're not talking about in infringing on someone's civil rights, but then again, you have to discuss what you mentioned, that these companies have become monopolies. So the argument that, oh yeah, Twitter has a right to ban anyone they want if they feel like they're inciting violence, and a defendant of that will tell you, well, that person, the company is free to do that. That individual can just go somewhere else. They can go to another platform. They can go and try to get their message out somewhere else. But that's not really the case, though. These companies have monopolies on communications now, on human interaction. So they've become too powerful. So how do you square that away? That they're so powerful that they can effectively bankrupt someone who's trying to run a business through them, like a Alex Jones. I don't know if he's bankrupt or not, but you can cause severe economic damage to someone just because of the size of these companies. So what are your thoughts on just trying to parse through the muddy waters of that?
It's a complicated issue, and I think going back to one thing you said, in some ways, the government does need to regulate, because when you think about it, the internet was, technically was created with governmental funds as a Department of Defense project to try to maintain communication in the case of nuclear annihilation. And in some ways, so there's a lot of public resources that have gone to create and keep and grow the internet as we know it, and particularly when you think of wireless, that wireless signal, the radio signals, those are regulated by government because it's a finite resource.
Right.
So, the government still has a right to license those waves, and it's one of the reasons why there's huge fights within the technology company as to who should be regulating telecommunication companies like Facebook and Twitter. Should it be the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, or should it be the Trade Commission that has a little bit more enforcement power? And I think you get to the good point of, is it when do you get to the differentiation between civil rights and freedom of expression, right? And I think part of the reason why Facebook and Twitter and other platforms have become so big is because they become the public square, right? So that's where people get their information, and as in with any regular public square, not all the information that you hear in La Placita del Pueblo is going to be accurate. A lot of it is going to be bochinche. A lot of it is going to be, bad thing, not bad things, but a gossip and things like that, things that are not real. But the question is, since so many people still think that everything that you see on the internet is true, how do you manage, I guess, people's right to be wrong, but also control misinformation and also prevent violence and instigation and discrimination in some other ways?
So just based on everything you've said, my natural conclusion would be that you're someone that is opposed to Trump being banned. Is that the case, or are you okay with the ban on Trump?
You know what? Yeah, I guess
I can tell
I'm
you
thinking
that.
through this real time.
Go ahead. Yeah, I can tell you how I feel. Well, I think you already know how I feel.
No, I'll tell you how I think I think I'm fine with it, just because I know that just
For the greater
having
good,
him on there and the voices like him has been so toxic
right? But how do you
that, like,
square that?
why legitimize that voice and those messages when there shouldn't be?
Right, but so you're making an exception, though. It sounds like
No, I think that any type of information or dialogue that's discriminatory, that's white supremacist, that's racist, that's homophobic, all those things, I think should receive a bigger scrutiny, right? There's a bigger, a larger, a higher bar for that type of speech.
that's a slippery slope, though, because it's easy to distinguish the extremes when it comes to xenophobia and homophobia. But remember when Bernie Sanders was running in 2016, and his supporters were being accused of being Bernie bros and being sexist. So
Hmm.
so by that argument, you could have banned them for being sexist if people are going to label them to be sexist. That's
Well, I
the
think it's part of it is what are the messages that they were putting out there, and sort of what was the evidence to prove that they were acting in that manner.
right. Well, then what's the evidence that not that Trump is xenophobic and racist? We know that, but there's millions of them on Twitter and they don't get banned, right? So it's kind of hard to build a case to say that any type of subtle or outright racism or xenophobia or sexism is going to be banned. You'd have to ban a huge portion of the population. But when it comes to Trump, he was banned, but you can't point to him actually saying, I want you guys to go out there and destroy and loot and create havoc. He didn't give the specific order for violence. So,
Didn't he though?
I mean, look,
I think it was pretty clear on January 6th and the messages and language leading up to that that he did incite violence, that
when,
he did incite the type of action that, yeah, again, he did not go into details like, oh, you should storm the Capitol and go in there and kidnap and
right?
harm those who don't agree with us.
Hmm.
But I think it was pretty evident that he basically, this is what you need to do. Go figure out how to do it.
I think with me is I understand that by being okay with Trump being banned, I'm afraid of what that means for everyone else going forward, especially for those voices that are anti-establishment, anti-imperialism. What does that
Mhm.
mean for everyone else going forward? So by getting this win, by being able to do this trade-off that Trump is banned, I feel like we're giving up so much more because we've now essentially, first of all, given all these private companies the authority or at least the green light to be able to ban individuals that they think are inciting violence. So let's just go through a scenario now. 2 years into the Biden administration, we're now at war with Iran. And we have a left wing group of anti war supporters that go to social media and they go on the streets, and we tell everyone that we need to be strong, that we need to be fierce, that we can't back down in our opposition to war, and that we need to march on Washington and show these politicians that we mean business, that we're not going to take no for an answer, that we're strong, that they've killed for too long, that we're going to oppose them at any cost. So now we say that, people go to Washington, it turns into a riot, and now can you come after those people and charge them for inciting violence
Well, I
using the
think
same
you can
exact
charge.
standard that they use for Trump?
No, I think you can charge them. You can charge those who, at the end of that peaceful protest, were inciting violence. But I think that within the scenario that you laid out, there is a protected uh, within the First Amendment, which states Congress shall not make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of press, or the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So again, this is where the petition of we're petitioning those individuals will be petitioning the government against the actions in war, just like on January 6th, Trump supporters had the right to petition the government
Hmm.
on a redress of grievance, even if that grievance
Right.
was based on false
Right. Exactly.
claims. But
Exactly.
then they went into the violent
Right. Right.
extreme.
Right. But so you can charge the people that were violent, but how does that
Mhm.
then come back to Trump? Because if you're going to ban Trump for inciting that, then they're also going to ban all of those left wing progressives that they're going to blame incited the protests in the Capitol that led to people trying to break in and people dying. I don't see where the difference is. And what I'm saying is that now that we're okay with this, it's going to come back around and hurt a lot of other groups, because they're just going to apply the same rule that they applied here for Trump. And by the way, you were mentioning the actual text in the law, and I got this from listening to Democracy Now, and Chris Hedges came on, and he mentioned this case, and I started reading about it. NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware. So essentially, in 1966, black citizens of Port Gibson, Mississippi, and other areas of Claiborne County presented white elected officials with a list of particularized demands for racial equality and racial integration. Now, those demands weren't met. So then the NAACP, the local chapter, they organized a boycott on the white merchants in that area. One of the members from the NAACP even went as far as saying, let's see, that any black citizen that they caught doing business with those white merchants, that it said, if we catch any of you going into these racist stores, we're going to break your damn neck. And now as a result of that, it says there were 10 instances where blacks who violated the boycott experienced instances of violence. Now, they weren't able to tie it directly to that speech, though. So the person wasn't charged. But in addition to this, they filed a lawsuit against it, the merchants did, for grievances, because they said that their actions led to negative consequences for them. And the state of Mississippi ruled with them. So it was holding the NAACP liable for inciting this boycott and for creating it. And then, but this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned it. And part of the statement that the Supreme Court said was, boycotts and related activities to bring about political, social, and economic change are political speech occupying the highest rung of the hierarchy of the First Amendment values. Mm-hmm. So essentially, you can't hold them accountable for simple speech if they're not directly giving an order to go create violence. So this sets somewhat of a precedent for why you shouldn't hold Trump accountable for what he said. It's protected, because if you don't protect him, then you're not going to be able to protect so many others. So at least that's how I'm interpreting it right now. What do you think?
Well, I think you're making an interesting case for him, because in some ways it is, I guess you can say, it is political speech. But again, at the same time, the facts are not with him, right? So the courts, the state officials certified the elections. Mm-hmm. There were other courts. I think there were something like 60 cases that looked at the facts and they found no wrongdoing.
Right.
So I think that to your point, I mean, there could be a grievance, but then I think a court, whether it's a Supreme Court or another, would kind of be able to say, okay, but this is false, and you incited violence on a false pretext,
false premise.
And I think but you bring a good point, and I think that's one of the great things and bad things about our law system, that sometimes, you know, a law or something that can bring about a lot of great progress and help people, a certain class of people who have been hurt previously, that can also be used in the favor of the other group, right? So in some ways, when you think of affirmative action, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about all these cases that are controversial, that somehow, and one of the things that I noticed last week was that's how quickly the double standard also became language that the right used to justify what had happening. Oh, the double standard, or how these protesters are being impacted. Right. In some ways, kind of taking the argument that, you know, that was being made about the double standard, Black Lives Matter, but now applying it to the conservatives. In some ways, that's the double standard that you get into, that people feel that in some ways these big companies, the intellectuals, the elites are against conservatism and are trying to censor it because they don't allow spaces for them to share these ideas. And I think that's part of that is true, but the other part is just the reality that, you know, when you study, when you read, when you learn, you appreciate to see things very differently, and that you kind of get perspective. And doesn't mean that being conservative is wrong. It just means that there are things that through your conservative values and conservative beliefs that are impacting other people in a wrong in a negative way, I guess I should say.
Okay, right. So I want to go back to what you said about the whether or not the validity of his grievance, whether or not he's arguing because or he's arguing for something that is correct. So essentially, if we break this down, you're talking about truth, whether there's truth to your argument and the reason why
Yeah.
you're inciting people. Because you're saying that it clearly with Trump, it's evident all of the lawsuits that they filed, they turned down, they didn't go anywhere. So there's nothing there to back his claim that there was fraud. And so I agree with you. But this same scenario then could be used if you're going to put so much emphasis on whether or not somebody is arguing from a point where they have truth behind them. So let's go back again to the anti-war protesters. I mean, we could say that the United States is invading countries illegally and funding rebels that they shouldn't be funding, and then they fund those rebels, and the weapons end up in terrorist groups. Okay, who's going to establish the truth in that case? So what if the truth gets established by the government that that's not happening? So now do they just get to call the protesters liars and therefore use the same justification that they use with Trump, meaning that you guys are continue to protest and you guys continue to come out here and incite violence, knowing full well that you are wrong because all of these different agencies from the government have come out and said that the United States government is not funding terrorists. They'll use that justification, right? So this is why this is so problematic to me that this always happens. There's like an extreme. It seems like there's an extreme case where somebody violates what we find to be acceptable, and just based on that, we want to clamp down on it. But I just feel like in the long term, it ends up hurting us. And also the other point that I wanted to make, you mentioned how sometimes we take actions that could then be used or incorrectly used in the future. What about even within law, right? The innocent until proven guilty. Doesn't it go that it's better to let 9 guilty people go free so that you don't incorrectly convict someone who's innocent? That's somewhat related to what we're saying here, the spirit of it, that we're willing to be wrong because we're fighting for a higher ideal. Isn't that the same case with Trump? We're willing to be wrong with him, and meaning that if you apply that same logic to that argument about innocent until proven guilty, if you apply that to Trump, then wouldn't we say we're willing to let this man continue to have a social media platform and not ban him because we believe in the higher ideal that people should have that freedom, that we don't want to take it away because it's bad, just the same way that it's bad to convict one innocent person. And I'm not defending Trump by any stretch of the imagination here. I'm glad that he doesn't have a platform anymore where he can speak nonsense. Whether I'm okay with it or not, I don't know. Does that make it right for the rest of society? Do I get to impose how I feel on the rest of society?
Yeah, and they're tough questions to ask because, in some ways, innocent until proven guilty, it is a high standard, but we also know that in practice, it's really the people who can afford the best lawyers, who have access, who can really game the system.
Right.
So obviously, there's that off balance that it turns out that a lot of people who actually end up going to jail are the ones that have public defendants, and even though they tried so hard, obviously they're not paid, they're not resourced the same way that some of the wealthy individuals are. In some ways, I think some may argue that Trump was proven guilty by the events of not only January 6th, but the call the weekend before about the Georgia elections. But you're right. I think it is a process, and I think you do point out that is the type of situation where we need to get to a place, part of the reasons why we probably also have the justice system that we do, that tries to get at that right balance of how do you um, regulate or control something without doing it in a way that is excessive or that would stymie others people's rights in the future. And I think in some instances, I think there's a hard decision that needs to be made, right? Are we going to protect these persons' expression rights over this person's humanity and civil rights, right? So I think it's a constant balancing of which rights do we want to protect more, giving historical context, giving whatever is happening. But I think it's a continuous conversation that we have as a society, and that ultimately the courts decide on. Um, yeah, and that kind of like they set those guardrails to by which we have the type of conversations that we're having.
Yeah, exactly. And I've mentioned this in the past that all I'm looking for is consistency. So if we're gonna do something one way, then let's be consistent about it. So if we're okay now with Twitter, Facebook, and all the other social media platforms banning Trump because the accusation is that he incited violence, then why are we okay with the same social media supporting protests across the world, like the protesters in Hong Kong or something like the Arab Spring? I mean, dude, that's violence. That's violence against the establishment. The Chinese government is a legitimate sovereign government. And if we're supporting protesters in Hong Kong, we're supporting violence against the state. We're inciting violence
Yeah,
by, by
but we and rightfully or wrongfully, however, whatever your perspective is on it, we sort of see the state as a, I guess what would be the right
a
term?
rogue actor.
Well, rogue actor, but more like a dictatorship,
But see that,
and I know we've
yeah,
supported dictators in the past, so that's not,
right, because we don't do it to Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is just convenience, right?
we're not beyond that.
But that doesn't matter though. Like the point is that they have it's a sovereign country, and once we start being okay with our government just labeling one country a dictatorship versus another one not, then dude, that's a slippery slope, right? Because totally subjective at that point. At that point, we're just defining what we think is right and wrong based on our own national interest.
But I think this gets back to your point. I think to your original point, like just I think that the people in Hong Kong, for the most part, those protests has been peaceful. People have been out there trying to exercise their right, respecting the type of arrangement they had. I guess once they were a British colony, and then after the British left. But in some ways, they're having a peaceful demonstration and trying to get more representation through the government. And I
But it's
think in
turned
some ways,
violent too.
is the example that you were getting at is like some maybe not anti-war, but in this case, oppression constituency trying to exercise their right, and they're being clamped down
Right.
by the state in a very
Yeah,
aggressive
and
way.
those some of those protests have turned violent. I don't recall if
But in response to the state being violent.
but
So
the state can always just say that it was their fault. The state can always come back around, and the state has the power to designate who's a friend and who's an enemy because they control the media. So right, if so from your point of view, yes, the protesters are within their rights to protest, and if there's any violence, it was the state. Well, what's the state gonna say? That they were just responding to the violent protests?
yeah,
But
but then
nobody's who's right though. The point is that there is no wrong or right. I guess suppose there is, but it's so hard to find it because everyone will just say what's in their own interest to forward advance their agenda. The truth is, once you get people out on the street to protest, it can go anywhere. It could be the protesters that get started. It could be the state. It could be embedded elements within the protesters that are actually from the state, because that's a tactic to discredit protests. It could be radical activists from within the protesters that started. Like it could be anyone, and after it happens, everyone will just point fingers at each other. So how do you know what the truth is? And you can't. But those empowered with the ability to control the media and control the message that gets sent out to people will be able to tell you and change minds. That's the other factor here. Like the ability to control people, what people believe. That's a powerful tool. And the government always has that powerful tool because they control the means of communication. So they can tell you, even though it's not completely accurate, or they may not even know, they'll tell you or they'll present a specific group as being the violent one, and the people will believe it. And once you have the public support, then that's all you need, because then you can move your agenda forward. So that's what I'm saying, that once you get into that, into that, into trying to justify some protests as being legitimate and others as not, it to me it's just like it's really gray area, because it could go anywhere.
Well, it is, but I think to that latter point, that's one of the reasons that same First Amendment protects the freedom of the press. Because in some ways, you're right, like controlling the means of communications is very important and something that the states does very well. But in modern times, a company like Twitter, like Facebook and others, they show that they have that power to control communication and the narrative. And one of the reasons why Trump attacked the free press and tried to make him seem like the enemy of the state, precisely because they were questioning his administration's policies, his views, and things like that. So that's a danger that he was trying to, and probably to an extent successfully, got a lot more Americans to distrust the press and what they were saying, and to an extent maybe they're right, because to your point, a lot of people see the mainstream press as the you know the place where that propaganda of the ruling elite, or the messages that the ruling elite want to get out there, that's how they get it out to the masses. So there's that point. And then the other point, I think fundamentally, is the consent of the governed, right? Any government needs to have the consent of the people to be legitimate. And if there's a segment of the population who's saying, I don't believe you're legitimate because of these reasons, I think that, like that's something that needs to be addressed, right? Something that needs to be that the government, and it's difficult to do, because in some ways the people in Hong Kong are saying your government is not legitimate. In some ways, the people who support Trump are saying, this new government is not legitimate. The elections were not legitimate, and in both instances, how is the government, and how are we as a society gonna try to address those types of situations where you have people within your own community or your own country that don't believe the government is legitimate, but you still need some sort of government in order to continue to exist as a society, and to do the things that you want to do for the majority of the folks who still think that you're doing a good job representing their interest.
No, you totally agree. Just based on what you were saying, I started thinking about the propaganda and dictatorships, and I'm just thinking, say you have a dictator out there, and you offer the dictator, you say, hey, look, you're a dictator, but it's a lot of bad press overseas and it's not going well. So how about this? You give people democracy and you give them the freedom to choose their next leader, but we'll give you complete access of the communications so that you can then just go and manipulate the people into keeping you in power. I think that dictator would probably be okay with giving up his official title of dictator, or whatever that title is, and just say, yeah, give the people the illusion that they're going to pick their next leader, because I control the communication and the messaging to them. So I'll just be able to get them to choose me or whoever I want to be in power. All I'm saying is that it's incredibly powerful to be able to set the narrative, because the you said the will of the people. The will of the people only takes you so far if what you're giving them is lies and misinformation and misdirection, and it's a concerted effort. That right. So to what good is it if the people don't even have the full information to make an informed decision?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point, and I think I would add that one of the reasons I think that's one of the reasons why the U.S. democracy is looked upon as a model because we have, in addition to the communication and the ability for people to vote and exercise their right to vote, you also have the institutions and the norms that prevent uh, a president from running more than two terms. You have other term limits and other safeguards. You have three branches of government instead of one. So I think that in some ways the people and their voices are important, but also the institutions and the checks and balances that are in place and that are protected are also important to making sure that you don't have an instance where that happens where somebody can just um, take those institutions down and then basically keep themselves and their family in power for however long they can, however long before there's an uprising against that abuse of power.
Yep. Okay. I'm okay with leaving it here. Any final thoughts on Trump being banned from social media?
No, it would be interesting to see because in some ways I feel that since he's been banned, it's been relatively quiet in terms of the news and kind of response to his tweets. So I just wonder what's going to happen after Wednesday, what kind of path he's going to choose to, continue to build his media empire, or if
Mm-hmm.
he has been discredited enough that he may not be as relevant as he once was.
He does seem to be falling in line now. So, yet to be determined. I think, at least for now, they've neutralized him until the transfer of power. What he does afterwards, it's hard to say. I don't think he's going away, but I agree with you. I don't know how effective he's going to be if you have banks that are no longer willing to do business with him. But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, this guy just cared about his business, his establishment. He doesn't care about his followers. How soon before he throws them overboard and just focuses on his own personal finances? I mean, is he
Yeah.
really a person of the people? If he really was for the people and for freedom of speech, he would pardon Julian Assange. Let's see. I don't think he's going to do that, but he's a con man. So whoever put their trust and faith that he would represent them, I think they're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, and I think maybe the people will also may flip on him. I think they may be looking for somebody who is better positioned to take their values and their ideology to the next level.
Yep. Okay. All right. If you out there enjoy what you're listening to, don't forget to follow us. Check us out. We are Brown Perspective on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram, and Parlor, but we've been taken down now.
Power doesn't like us.
Nos vemos.
Ciao.